Dr. Marvin's on vacation in New Hampshire.
New Hampshire?
Hi there, and welcome to Baseball by Design. I am SportsLogos.net minor league baseball correspondent Paul Caputo, broadcasting live, as always, from the Sunday Helmet Hall of Fame in my basement in Fort Collins, Colorado. Today, we're going to be talking about the Double-A New Hampshire Fisher Cats, an affiliate of the Toronto Blue Jays who play in Manchester, New Hampshire. Later on in this episode, I'll be speaking with designer Dan Simon of Studio Simon, who created the original logo for the Fisher Cats, but also who created the logo for the New Hampshire Primaries. And there's an animal involved, so you know that Baseball by Design wildlife correspondent Ranger Amy Burnett will be here. Right now, I am so pleased to be joined for the first time on this podcast by Michael Nice, who is the general manager of the New Hampshire Fisher Cats. Michael, how are you doing?
I'm doing well today, Paul. How are you?
I'm doing really well. This is a really fun brand, has a lot of history to it. A great story too, right? Because, just Fisher Cats in general are interesting animals. Yes. I'm going to jump right in with 2 feet here and just ask you the question, why is the team in Manchester, New Hampshire called the New Hampshire Fisher Cats?
It's a great question, Paul. And it's a fun one too that we do get a lot. Of course, the fisher itself, the animal is called a fisher. The fisher is native to the New England region and the Northeast in general. And I think there's a lot of ties to the animal itself and what we represent as a brand and hopefully how we identify as an organization. The fisher it's rugged, it's outdoors, it's in the woods, which we have a lot of here in New Hampshire. And it's also a great combination of ferocious and playful. And that's what we really lean on a lot when we talk about our brand. And so when you combine those elements, we think that the Fisher and ultimately our name, the Fisher Cat, really does represent who we are and what we stand for.
It's an interesting animal, right? And I wrote about this team back in 2015 for SportsLogos.net and noted that the Fisher Cat, A, does not eat fish, and B, is not a cat.
That is correct. It's Rhode Island is neither a road nor an island, right? It's a reference to SNL, but no, it's a fun anecdote there that it's not a cat, more like a weasel actually in the actual animal kingdom. But we get the fish thing all the time. Are you a fish or a cat? Somewhere in between, and no, we're a Fisher Cat.
The team has sort of a storied. Well, it has an interesting history with its logo because it's, the original was created by Dan Simon, who's a regular guest on the podcast, and then there's been the current was created by Rickabaugh Graphics.
So yes,
there's been a handful of sort of different colors, different updates. The current version's been around for a little while. The team, the nickname has been around since 2004, so almost 2 decades, which in minor league terms, as I've said on this podcast before, is something of an eternity. Given that you are relatively new to the team as the general manager, is that something that the team talks about? Is this brand firmly entrenched, or does the possibility exist that there are other things that might tie to the area that you could rebrand as?
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. And it's a great question too. And one we definitely ask ourselves. I do think right now that we have, and as we approach our 20th anniversary season here, which we're extremely proud of here in 2024, we do think that the Fisher Cat brand itself here in Manchester and New Hampshire and really the region itself, we feel very proud of it. We feel very honored to continue that brand. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't have fun with some alternate identities. We certainly do that as much as other teams do. We've had a very successful Manchester Chicken Tenders rebrand.
We're going to talk about the Chicken Tenders.
So
I'm going to ask you about that.
Good. I won't jump the gun on that, but we have a couple other fun ones that we're introducing as well. But when it comes to the Fisher Cats, we do as a primary identity, we do feel very strongly about what that's meant to the community for the last 20 years. And for people that say, hey, I was here since 2004 and we played our first year in historic Gill Stadium. And next year, then the following year will be 20 years here at Delta Dental Stadium in Manchester.
The original brand, like I said, was created by Dan Simon. That one was used from 2004 to 2007. Featured a decidedly nasty looking animal, right? Like this was a fierce looking Fisher Cat. who, you wouldn't want to mess with. And he's carrying what even looks like an aluminum bat here, right?
Yeah.
So that was from 04 to 07. And then essentially the two looks since then, there was a green and yellow version created by Rickabaugh Graphics of a Fisher Cat sort of peering over the script for Fisher Cats. And then the colors changed when affiliations changed. Both of those looks have had sort of a fiercer look about them, right? Like not necessarily kid friendly, right? And I think you're seeing obviously a lot of that in the minor league baseball landscape now, the more sort of kid friendly, cartoony logos. Is that part of the conversation when you talk about, okay, what might this brand be someday? The very fierce version in 04, and then the less fierce but still not cartoony version that's been around since 2008. Neither one of those is real cartoony.
Yes, correct. Yeah, and that's a great conversation piece as well, and one that we have had, and something that we could see in the future. We do want. I mentioned both of those elements, and I think that's the line that we're always looking to straddle, right? It's the ferocity of the animal when we talk about the logos, and so you can look it up online. A Fisher is an aggressive, ferocious animal that is a hunter and goes out and gets it done, as it were. But it also having sort of that ferret weasel energy does have a lot of playfulness and fun. So you can do a lot with that when it comes to the family friendliness and the kid friendliness and what the logo does. So we do use some alternate fungo as our mascot, our primary mascot as a Fisher Cat. And we do use for things like our kids club, we do use a different version of fungo that's a little more of that cartoon look, a little bit more of that family friendly environment. And, we do, when we actually have our physical mascot walking around too, he has a decidedly family friendly look to him as well.
Part of this team's lore, every once in a while, and I'm sure you know where I'm going with this, every once in a while you see a logo get introduced, or at least an identity that gets introduced that elicits such a response that the team actually backtracks on it. And again, this precedes your time with the team by almost 2 decades.
Yes, exactly.
But I'm sure you're familiar with the story of the New Hampshire Primaries,
of course,
which was a logo that was unveiled. I think probably in 49 states, they thought it was great, right? Like, I think a lot of people looked at this and thought, this logo, the New Hampshire Primaries, touches on the fact that obviously New Hampshire is the first state to have its primaries during the election cycle. 49 states thought, probably looked at this logo, which is objectively a great logo. Like, it's a really fun logo, looked at that and said, oh, that's what a fun thing to do. And then one state, New Hampshire, is so sick of being associated with the primaries that they revolted against it, and the team backtracked and became the Fisher Cats instead. But then that Primaries brand, or at least a version of it, has then been reprised by the team and is out there now. What is, as someone who's not been with the team for a terribly long time, what is your understanding of like the arc of that story and where that brand sits now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great question. It is a fun thing to talk about, right? And a lot of teams do the what could have been nights, and we've certainly done that with a couple of other of the finalists as well. The Granite State Mountain Men is one we've done in previous years. That was one of the finalists when they revoted, and we've brought that back to life as well. But no, the primaries, I mean, you say the word New Hampshire and you talk nationally about the things that New Hampshire identifies with, and certainly the first in the nation primary is, and the political scene as a result of that is, something that if you just did word association, a lot of people would connect with New Hampshire. And I would actually say too that people in New Hampshire, New Hampshireites, are very proud of that fact, and we take it very seriously. It's not only a badge of honor, but it's a great responsibility that really sets these national election into motion. And obviously New Hampshireites take a lot of pride in being that early voice in the process. So I look at it as a lot of fun. Not only as a what could have been. I obviously can't speak necessarily to some of the reactions that were taking place back when it was first introduced. But I will say that I do know that, as we've done in past years, usually around a presidential cycle, when we've invigorated that brand and brought it back out on the field and had the merchandise in the store, it's been embraced. And it's been a lot of fun. I think one of the fun parts about it is it does have that, it's got the donkey and the elephant, which of course, can be divisive when you talk about people's politics and where they fall on either side of the fence. But I think that also plays into a little bit of that minor league fun as well, where, we do have, and we've gotten our team store. You could walk in today and you can purchase the blue or the red cap, right? And and the logo kind of meshes them together. And I will say, as a little teaser, that is something. It's a presidential year coming up in 24. I'm sure that's not breaking news to anybody here on the podcast, but we do plan on having the Primaries brand out there on the field in 2024. And every 4 years when that cycle comes around, I hope people can set their clock and once again re-embrace that Primaries look.
I look forward to checking out the team store when I'm there. We have plans already. Ranger Amy Burnett, who is Baseball by Design's wildlife correspondent, who will be later on in this episode talking about Fisher Cats. She is from New Hampshire, and we're going to go to a Fisher Cats game.
Love it.
And that'll be in September of the 2024 season. I look forward to rating the team store when we're there.
Please do. We want the feedback. We love it. And hopefully walking out with a couple items too. That'd be great.
Oh, I never make it out of the team store without at least a few things. It's
Good.
Well, you see this hat wall behind me, right? So
yes, we need a Fisher Cats one up there. Whatever your favorite cap is, that's for sure.
One of the items that I'm sure will be intriguing to me is one of the alternate brands that you have put together. You mentioned the Mountain Men. And that's a fun one. We can talk about that as well. But the one I really want to focus on is the Manchester Chicken Tenders.
Yes.
Which was a brand that was unveiled along with this claim. And I had no idea that this is even a thing that could have been invented, but that the chicken tender was invented in Manchester, New Hampshire. So I love this story. This is a really fun alternate brand, one of the really fun sort of food frenzy minor league baseball brands. But where does this claim come from that Manchester is responsible for chicken tenders?
Yes. Yeah. And that is a lot of fun to talk about as well. And any good brand, I think, that elicits questions or follow-ups, I think that's a big part of measuring its success, right? Not that we want it to be so vague that it doesn't ring some bells, but those follow-up questions are fantastic. But no, we here in Manchester do claim the origin of the chicken tender. One of our great local restaurants, really a staple of the community, the Puritan Backroom Restaurant, is by all accounts the inventor of the chicken tender. So the original chicken tender, and as a result, it's something that locals take a ton of pride in. Chicken tenders there are incredible, by the way. So when you make that trip, I may have to, they are a proud partner here, so I might have to make that suggestion that you make that stop off and try the original tender.
I think that's a definite. I think that has to be a definite for sure.
Yeah, well, maybe while wearing a chicken tender hat too. So if we can combine those two, we've got some synchronicity. But no, so that it's something that not a lot of people maybe outside the area are aware of. Maybe you don't think of, hey, where did this originate? But it is the first documented place of origin for the chicken tender. So in addition to having a fantastic product, it is the original. And we've had the last 2 years, we've been able to unveil this extremely popular brand, where we do rebrand as the Manchester Chicken Tenders, paying homage to, of course, the fact that we do play here in Manchester. So for that night, we embrace the city name. We always embrace Manchester as our home, but of course play as the New Hampshire Fisher Cats. So when we are the Manchester Chicken Tenders, we've got a great logo. We've got some really fun uniforms that go along with it, and then we really try to make sure that the ballpark itself is extremely chicken tender centric. So we have, for both nights, served the original Puritan Backroom Restaurants chicken tenders, which they've been very gracious to donate and have in park for those nights. This last year in 2023. We actually had the mayor's office deliver a proclamation declaring Manchester as the chicken tender capital of the world.
Wow!
So if you can have an official world proclamation prior to first pitch for me, that's a good start to a minor league baseball game. So you got great chicken tenders, you got awesome unis on the field. People love the merchandise. It's some of our best selling product that we have, year in and year out since we've introduced it. And we're planning on having even more fun with it. We haven't announced it yet, but we do plan on this upcoming year. Let's call it, having a little bit more fun, maybe turning up the heat. It's a little teaser on the chicken tender brand for this year. So stay tuned.
Oh.
NHFisherCats.com for some more info on what we're going to look like on the field with that Tenders jersey in 24.
Right. Well, we'll cover it on sportslogos.net when that happens. We talked about with the Primaries brand, fans sort of voting with their merchandise choices. I'm curious to know, because there were 3 different versions of this chicken tenders brand. You had the classic, the buffalo, and the coconut. I know which one I would choose. Is there one that was the prevailing favorite? Was there a fan favorite of those 3?
Well, I will say last year we did have a fan vote, and the original, and maybe that speaks to the origin, but the original did win last year. So we do plan on having 2 nights this upcoming year, which is exciting. That might be a little late breaking news as well. Breaking news all over the place, but we do plan on, so that gives us the opportunity to play for the first time with one of those other sets as well, which I think that's going to be a lot of fun.
I think that I would be eating the buffalo chicken while wearing the coconut hat.
Okay,
so
interesting.
The coconut brand is a fun one there. So
it is. It's got the island coconut vibes. So exactly. It is a fun brand, no doubt.
So the other brand that we've mentioned a couple of times here is this Mountain Men brand, which is named for a sort of famous geological feature in Manchester, the Old Man of the Mountain. Is that brand still around? Is that one that you guys are wearing, or is that does that come and go?
Yeah, that's one that we did wear this last year. We don't have it on the docket for this upcoming season, but it is something that falls under that category of what could have been. Certainly was the Granite State Mountain Men. We are the Granite State as well, which I think is another key identifier when you talk about the state of New Hampshire. We've got some great rock faces, and of course the Old Man in the Mountain being the most recognizable, maybe historically, right? I think any logo or identity that ties is very local, but also is something that people nationally can say, hey, that's not only is that cool, but I learned a little bit something about the area or the state. I love when it causes me to think a little further, but also then find out something unique about the state. And I think a couple of the things that we've mentioned, whether it be chicken tenders, Mountain Men, Primaries, these are all things that, if you didn't know that about New Hampshire, well, guess what? Hopefully if people found out a little bit more and did a little research on their own.
We've stumbled on the entire premise of this podcast, right?
Yes.
Like, because you can learn the history of America by, understanding why minor league baseball teams are called what they're called.
It's a great point. Absolutely.
It's and I laugh because I find myself in conversations all the time with, people who are not involved in minor league baseball. And, they'll tell me they're from some small town in the middle of, some state that I don't go to that often. And I can say something about their town usually because there's a team nearby that has a name that has a story. And it's like, hey, baseball did that.
Yeah, it's amazing. I try the best when I'm traveling to wear some sort of Fisher Cats branded gear. And you would be amazed whether it's East Coast, West Coast, Southeast, Southwest, wherever you are. There's going to be that one or two people that will point it out and say, hey, I used to live in New Hampshire, or I had a friend who was part of the Blue Jays system.
I am that guy. I will go out of my way to say hello to someone who's wearing minor league baseball stuff just out there in the world.
And people do, because it's a community. There's a community aspect to it.
Absolutely. All right, Michael, before I let you go, I am obligated to ask you the question. I know that you've got stuff coming up in 2024. Is there anything you're allowed to tell us that you have coming up, or we gotta wait for the big unveil?
Yeah, we are unveiling in this next month here. So, stay tuned. NHFisherCats.com is the primary source, no pun intended, primary source for all of your latest New Hampshire news, or of course, follow us on social. I will say, the one thing that people probably do anticipate, a couple things that I feel comfortable saying is it is our 20th anniversary season. So we do plan on celebrating that 20-year history and including multiple Eastern League championships and a lot of the great teams and identities that have come through here in those 20 years. As well as knowing that it's a presidential year, that Primaries logo. So we're really excited about that. We do have multiple, like I could go on and on about all the different fun things that we're doing throughout the course of 2024, but those are a couple that I'm probably allowed to say, and B, that I'm personally very excited about.
Awesome. Well, I will look forward to covering those brand announcements on sportslogos.net. We'll look forward to getting back to Manchester for a baseball game.
We love it, and we can't wait to have you back out here, Paul, and anytime, please let us know. We'd love to host you.
Awesome. Well, Ranger Amy and I will see you in September. Michael, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast, and we will look forward to meeting you in person in September.
Thanks again, Paul. Absolute pleasure.
Artivone, welcome back. As you know, on this podcast, I love to speak with the designers responsible for the incredible logos that we get to talk about every single week. This week, I'm so pleased to welcome a designer you may have heard of, one Dan Simon of Studio Simon, who, while Dan created the original mark for the New Hampshire Fisher Cats, that is not what Dan is here to talk about. We are here to talk about an alternate universe in which the New Hampshire Fisher Cats were not the Fisher Cats at all, but in fact, the original team that was unveiled when the team moved from New Haven. They were the New Haven Ravens and then became the New Hampshire Fisher Cats. But between those two brands, there was the New Hampshire Primaries, which was a name that was created and unveiled as the name of the team. And after a fan backlash, an ill-advised fan backlash, because it was a great brand, they changed course and went with the Fisher Cats. Like I said, Dan created the original Fisher Cats logo, but Dan is here to talk about the New Hampshire Primaries. Dan, after that long introduction, how are you doing?
As always, Paul, why don't you tell me how I'm doing?
You are doing fantastic, which is how you're always doing, which I always love to hear. And busy. I understand that you are busy these days, and that's also a good thing, which, you can take or leave.
Being busy when you run your own business is a good thing. Mm-hmm. So the fact that I have worked at this point 5 weekends in a row, it hasn't been a problem because I'm working on some great projects. That's one of the cool things about doing sports brand and brand identity development is it's fun, not just for me and my job, but it's fun for the people I'm doing it for.
We are talking about a brand this week that happened 20 years ago. This New Hampshire Fisher Cats team has been around since 2004, which means back then, with the timetables back then, it would have been the fall of 2003 that you were wrapping up these identities for this team. And as I mentioned in my sort of long preamble, this team was first announced as the New Hampshire Primaries. And so it's a great idea for a team that plays in a state where they do, in fact, have the first contests in the election cycle. So I'm curious to know, I just want to sort of hand the reins over to you, if you would, as a designer who created a successful, fun brand that, in retrospect, and in fact, not only just in retrospect, but in the actual practical reality, the team brought back because they realized, oh, this is a fun thing. And in the new landscape of minor league baseball, I think that logo was just before its time, right? Like it was 2003 and the world wasn't ready for that kind of identity. But now I don't think anyone would bat an eye at it. And in fact, the team is using that Primaries, or at least a version of that Primaries brand that you created. So what was that like for you as a designer to create a brand that, was objectively a good brand and would have, I think, ultimately been embraced and well received, to have it sort of scrapped and tossed aside for at least the short term?
Well, your point about the world not being ready for it, as you just mentioned, it was 20 years ago, almost to the day that I was working on it. Well, I didn't work on it just for a day, but in looking at the dates on some of my files for that, it was October and November. Well, we're in December now, October and November of 2003. I probably started in September. I don't remember exactly when it started, but it was right around this time 20 years ago. And it's amazing when you think about the outcry when that identity was developed. It was, oh my goodness, how can you name a team the Primaries? I even remember, you mentioned it was a fan outcry, but I don't know. I'm not disagreeing with that, but I'm not sure if it was the fans so much or the media. And when I say the media back then was so different than it is today. So we're even just talking about whatever the newspaper, the main newspaper was in Manchester, New Hampshire, the Manchester Dispatch. I don't even remember what it's called, although it very well could have been. And if you can get one of your production crew to look that up while we're talking about it.
We've got a team of producers back here working on it already.
I'm putting my money down on the Manchester Dispatch, although I don't know if I'm just making that up or if I remember that. But I really think it was a media-led outcry. And what's amazing about it is when you compare it to the world today and the minor league branding landscape today, where you've got rumble ponies and trash pandas, and you had baby cakes and blue wahoos, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The name New Hampshire Primaries is benign in comparison. Nobody would bat an eye at that. I think you might have even used that expression when in your preamble to this question. They wouldn't bat an eye about it today. It'd be met with, oh, that's cute, as opposed to what in the world are you doing? The main objection, it seemed, to the name Primaries was not even, it seemed, I know this, it was written that sports teams are named after animals and the like, not after a thing, an event. So it's amazing when you think about what the objection was, and thinking about it today, it's like, really? They weren't that crazy about it? But one of the things that happened was it was a matter of a vocal minority being much louder than the silent majority. Because I can tell you that this identity was unveiled, and shortly thereafter, well, it was unveiled and immediately repealed. But shortly thereafter, I was at the baseball winter meetings, and I can't tell you how many individuals came up to me at the baseball winter meetings and said what a shame it was that they didn't go with Primaries because they thought it was the greatest thing. But people are, I don't know if this is still the case, because frankly, with social media, people are happy to get on social media and yell at the moon, yell at the clouds, or whatever the expression is. But back then, if somebody liked something, they were less likely to be vocal about it as they were to be vocal about something they dislike.
I wonder if, too, at the time, teams just didn't have the stomach for the outcry, right? Like they didn't have the stomach for what has become almost expected now with most rebrands. Most rebrands, I think, are met with an initial wave of negativity and then embraced, right? Like, and we've talked about the J curve on this podcast many times, where there's a sort of immediate negativity followed by acceptance and breaking of sales records and that sort of thing. By the way, my team of producers is back with the results of their crack research here. I'm being told that an online petition was created by 2 local baseball fans asking team ownership to reconsider. And that online petition was covered by the New Hampshire Union Leader. Front page article in the New Hampshire Union Leader.
Rest in peace, Manchester Dispatch.
So, as I mentioned, the team, I think, realized the error of its ways. I, personally think that the name Fisher Cats is, it's not a bad name, and we'll talk to Ranger Amy about the relative merits of Fisher Cats as a baseball mascot, but it certainly doesn't stand out in today's minor league baseball landscape, right? Like, it's been around for 20 years and it's an animal from the region, right? Like, and that is something that I think is pretty nondescript when it comes to, especially minor league baseball today. I'm interested in the fact that they brought back this Primaries brand as an alternate in recent years. I'm wondering, the marks that they're using now as these alternates, were they ones that you had created as the original Primaries brand, which features an elephant and a donkey with bats on their shoulders, wearing patriotic hats, obviously elephants and donkeys being symbols for the two major political parties in the United States. And then when they reprised the brand originally, it was with Uncle Sam calling his shot, with the state of New Hampshire outlined behind him. But the marks that they're using now, are these ones that were part of that original suite that you created, or are they new ones that they've come up with?
Nope, that's the stuff I did 20 years ago, and it's kind of cool that to see that here we are 2 decades later, and that artwork is still as effective as it was back then. Whenever you do any type of any brand identity, whether that's for a sports team, whether that's for a fast food chain or any other type of company, you want it to have, ideally, you want it to have longevity. Not everything that I did 20 years ago I am that proud of, but I look at that work for the Primaries, and it still stands up today. I will say that the word mark part of it, the Primaries lettering, a little busier with kind of outlines and shadows or whatever I put on that than something I would do today. That's the one thing I would change. But other than that, I feel the characters still, the donkey, the elephant, and the Uncle Sam characters still hold up to this day, 20 years later.
I wonder if some of the reaction was a function of the timing of the announcement. It was unveiled in October of 2003, which was, right smack dab before Bush-Kerry, right? Like, which at the time was considered a pretty contentious election. Obviously, we have seen more contentious elections since then, but I wonder if election burnout maybe caused sort of a stronger reaction in that small minority that reacted negatively to it, more so than if it had happened on a non-election year. So I don't know. It's just sort of throwing that out there. But
well, no, that's certainly a good point, and certainly that we won't know unless we get into our time machine and go back and revisit that. But that's altogether possible. But I also wonder if, let's say, they unveiled it on a non-election year, maybe it wouldn't have been that big of a thing. People wouldn't have been that interested in it because it's like the New Hampshire primary was not top of mind. And it's
right.
Like, why would you name it that? It's not even, it's only a thing that happens every 4 years, and it's not happening now. So, right. but then again, maybe that would have let it fly under the radar, and not that public outcry that happened might not have happened. Let's go back in time, Paul, and let's unveil this in a non-election year and see if maybe we can get it to stick.
Well, I don't know if I've mentioned on this podcast before, but my favorite genre of popular culture, movies, TV shows, books, etc., is time travel. I love time travel stuff, so I would be happy to go back in time and try this again and see if it's, or maybe we just kneecap those two ding-dongs who started the online petition and just take them out of the picture, and then we don't have to worry about that anymore. I'm curious, as I said, this is a segment about the New Hampshire Primaries identity that you created, but once it became clear that the team was moving in a different direction and that they were going to go with a different name, you're up against the clock, right? I mean, that's something that was Fisher Cats a name that had been considered and that you had done some work on, or did you just have to scramble and come up with something quickly?
Scramble and come up with something quickly. No, okay. It was not even mentioned. The name was going to be Primaries. There were no other ones that were being considered. If there were, that would have been on the part of the team, and that was not shared with me. Back then, I can tell you, I actually had named one team at that point, but working with teams to come up with new names, which is something I regularly do now, was not something I was doing back then. Back then, with one exception, teams came to me with a name, and that's what I worked on, and the name was Primaries. And so when I first heard about Fisher Cats when the team pulled the plug on Primaries, and that was one of the names in the Name the Team finalists list. I'd never even heard of a Fisher Cat before, as was the case with most of America. People were not familiar with them, I guess, until somebody decided to name a baseball team after them.
Well, we're about to become more familiar with them because the next segment will have Ranger Amy Burnett, Baseball by Design's wildlife correspondent, coming on to tell us all about the Fisher Cat itself. And then after that, of course, Dan, you will be back with a Studio Simon Stumper. So I really appreciate you coming on and talking about this Primaries brand. What fun to revisit that 20 years later. And we'll talk to you again in just a few. Welcome back to the podcast. One Ranger Amy Burnett, Baseball by Design's official wildlife correspondent. Ranger Amy, hello.
Hello.
We are going to be talking about an animal that is representative of your native state of New Hampshire, the Fisher Cat.
Yeah.
We've discussed already on this episode that it is neither a cat nor does it eat fish. So what are we talking about here? What's a Fisher Cat?
Well, it could, but it probably is not quite. I mean, it's not its main food.
Oh, okay. But it is not a fisher.
No, it is not a fisher.
Okay.
Yeah, the reason that they think that the name Fisher Cat came from that French word that I told you that I had to have you pronounce for me.
Fish.
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 Because it looked like a European polecat, and they thought it was related. It probably is a little bit. So
European polecat sounds like a great insect.
it sounds like a good time. The Fisher Cat is actually is in the weasel family and related to an otter. It's the second largest in that family. So, but if you look at it, it doesn't look that much bigger than a squirrel. But these cats, or fishers, as they should be called, are actually ferocious.
So you would call it a fisher.
I would just call it a fisher.
You would call it a fisher.
Yeah, we don't really call it a Fisher Cat because it's not a cat.
So they're little but ferocious.
They're little but ferocious.
Like
yeah.
Napoleon.
Oh yeah. Yeah, they might have like a little inferiority complex. They eat pretty much anything that you can imagine. They're omnivores, and they eat everything from nuts and berries and things like that to meat, which is their favorite. So they can eat rodents, they can eat rabbits, they can eat squirrels, and everything up to porcupines. That's kind of what they're famous for eating. Porcupines.
They're famous for eating porcupines.
Yeah, they're famous for eating porcupines.
Oh.
They're way smaller than a porcupine.
Yeah.
And like, think about how many quills a porcupine has. Like, how can you eat a porcupine?
Right.
Very, very carefully.
Very carefully. Yeah. I missed my chance there.
You should have gotten that one.
Do they hunt the meat that they eat, or do they scavenge it?
They do eat carrion. So carrion is dead things.
Yeah.
But they do prefer to.
It's also the suitcase that you bring on a plane.
Oh, Paul.
Come on, that was pretty good.
That was pretty good, I have to say. But they prefer to hunt.
Okay.
Meat. So they're pretty ferocious, and they're pretty agile climbers.
Oh.
They have really cool feet, so they can rotate their ankles 180 degrees in the same way that squirrels can. They'll force a porcupine to like go up to a tree and then sort of stick its quills out. So it's like, hey, you can't get me. And then the fisher will run up the tree and go down the tree with these ankles that are like twisting and like bite the porcupine in the face, because that's like the unprotected part.
Right in the face.
Right in the face.
Wow. This is, for the listener at home, I wish you could see the contortions that Ranger Amy is going through trying to explain exactly how the mechanics of this work.
Well, and that's not even the best part. So remember it kind of reminds me of the whole Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner. You know how Wile E. Coyote was always trying to like mix up the crazy, do all these crazy things to get
with
the
Acme
Roadrunner.
Dynamite.
But this little tiny fisher is actually really good at doing things that sound really silly and getting the porcupine in the end. or underbelly, as it were.
Yeah, or in the face.
In the face.
Right.
So what they do, one of the ways they catch porcupines or kill porcupines, is they'll run it in circles and tire it out.
Oh. Huh.
Can you imagine?
So, all right. So I'm trying to think of the baseball applications for this. First of all, they're good climbers.
Yeah.
They're out in the outfield, climbing the wall, taking a home run away.
Yep. And those ankles. If you've got 180-degree rotating ankles, it's going to make you a pretty agile baseball player.
Nimble, right? You can change
Very
direction.
nimble. Yeah.
So maybe like a middle infielder. That's the same sound effect all of your animals make, though. That is just the official Ranger Amy sound effect.
It's also Star Wars sound effect too.
If they're running circles around you, though, maybe they're good at stealing bases. If they're running circles around the base paths.
Circles. Yeah, they can tire out their adversaries.
Yeah. It's like, it's like catchers getting tired of trying to catch Ronald Acuna. Fisher cats are the Ronald Acuna of...
Is he short? Because fishers are short.
I don't know that Ronald Acuna is short, but he's very fast. He way led the league in stolen bases this year.
So the fishers actually just sort of run circles around the porcupines, tire them out, and then they bite their faces like, oh.
Yeah.
And they don't do it until they're pretty much dead, but then they flip them over and then they get them in the underbelly because there's no quills there.
This is gruesome.
I know.
This description reminds me a little bit of Tasmanian devils.
Yeah. It's like the Tasmanian devil of the Northeast.
Yeah.
It's kind of
okay.
Cool. So you can find them in the Northeast. You can also find them on the West Coast as well, but they're more prevalent on the East Coast. There aren't as many big predators hunting them on the East. So you can find them if you live in New England, of course, New Hampshire, where I'm from.
Yeah.
But you can also find them in New York, Southern Canada, and then fairly rare in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and even Virginia.
But they're not easy to find.
They're very elusive. They're they're just very sneaky. Maybe that's another baseball advantage.
Sneaky.
They're sneaky. I mean,
good at the hidden ball trick.
Is that
Careful.
G rating?
Careful.
G rating? Okay. So these little predators that people hardly ever see, they're ferocious. They're kind of like, people really had no idea what good they were for the ecosystem until they started decimating them.
Yeah.
Because they have beautiful silky pelts, and even though they're not that big, people would, back in the early 1900s, they could get $100 for pelt. That's kind of a lot.
That's a lot back then.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
And so they would hunt. So they trapped them, they hunted them, and then they realized that the porcupine population was going up. What does that matter? Well, if you're a logger, that matters a lot. And so the loggers lobbied.
If you're an IPA.
So the loggers actually lobbied to reintroduce fishers into a lot of these areas that you can now find them in today. Because basically what was happening is, what happens if you have too many porcupines?
Too many quills.
And they eat all the baby saplings. They basically gnaw on the trees and kill all the baby saplings. And so they were planting these trees, and they're like, why are all these trees dying? Because all the porcupines are eating them.
And without trees, no baseball bats.
No baseball bats. See, so fishers are really important to baseball.
Yeah.
You need them to curb the porcupine population so you can have more trees.
Porcupine population.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Here was kind of a nerdy thing that I found out. In the early 1900s, they tried raising them just like they do for foxes, with foxes for pelts. So they started breeding. They wanted to try to breed them. Well, fishers have a 10-month gestation. So basically they mate and they don't have babies for 10 to 11 months. And so these people that are raising them for fur, they're like, what gives? But that kind of died out.
Yeah.
They're just kind of a cool animal. Oh, they have a crazy crazy sound that they make that's really scary in the middle of the night.
We're going to drop that in right here. Or we're just going to leave you making that sound.
No, it's a crazy sound.
No, for real. Now here's the sound.
So you can still find them in places in the Northeast, and of course, as I said, back out west. But climate change is a threat to them, and they need a pretty dense forest canopy in order to survive. They also are really smelly.
Oh.
So yeah, they have these scent glands on their back pads that make them smell. So a lot of people smell them sometimes before they see them.
I expect that's true of most baseball players as well.
Yeah, maybe they smell like a locker room. I don't know. I've been trying to get myself in a locker room, as you know, but it has not worked. One other kind of interesting thing. I mean, talk about how fierce these little guys are. They did a study where they radio collared a bunch of lynxes. You know what a lynx is, right?
Sure.
Like the bigger cousin to the bobcat. In this particular study, they found several of their lynxes were killed by fishers.
Whoa.
I mean, can you imagine? Like something
the
size of a house cat taking down a lynx?
Have you met my house cat?
Yeah, she's pretty formidable.
I can imagine her taking down anything.
Yeah. So, yeah, the formidable fisher. It's a pretty cool animal.
Well, very cool. That's worthy of a minor league baseball nickname.
We are going to go see them in September.
We're going to go see them over Labor Day weekend.
The baseball team, not the fisher.
Well, maybe we'll see the animals.
I don't know. We could try.
All right.
We'll have to go to Manchester, New Hampshire.
Hopefully you won't get caught trying to sneak into the locker room.
I'm just going to follow my nose.
Ranger Amy Burnett, so glad to have you back again. We will see you in a not too distant future episode.
All right. Stay smelly, everybody.
All right, everyone, welcome back. It is time once again for Studio Simon Stumpers. Obviously, you've already heard from Dan on this episode, but now we are here for what is sure to be a very difficult Studio Simon Stumper trivia question based on the wildlife of New Hampshire, based on the U.S. election cycle, based on fishing, based on cats. I don't know. Who knows what it's going to be? Dan, welcome back to the podcast. Thanks for taking time out of what we have already discussed is your very busy schedule to do a Studio Simon Stumper.
Well, it's good to be back. I feel like it's almost like I was never away. For fans of the Studio Simon Stumper segment of Baseball by Design, this is going to be the first time that the Studio Simon Stumper it's a given for to borrow from another sport, a metaphor from another sport. I'm putting this one right on a tee for you. You're going to drive it straight down the fairway and right into the hole because
I don't know what that means.
So because I normally don't have the benefit of knowing what you have discussed in the episode because I'm not privy to those interviews that you do. But being that I was interviewed for this, you brought up the subject of today's stumper. So, but there's more things to discuss once you get what's going to be. I know you're going to get this one right. So
the good news for you though, Dan, is that I very rarely remember anything more than like 30 seconds to a full minute ago. So that's very possible that whatever I said that makes you think I'm going to get this has gone full out of my head.
Well, if you get this one wrong, Paul, you are dumb as a bag of hammer. Okay, so here we go. As with a stumper from earlier this year, which asked that particular stumper I'm referring to asked which team moved to Lakewood, New Jersey and rebranded as the Blue Claws. Our Studio Simon Stumper today also relates to franchise relocation and asks, in what other new locale did today's featured team play before moving to New Hampshire? Was it A, New Britain, Connecticut, B, New Haven, Connecticut, or C, Newport, Rhode Island?
So, Dan. If I had not already mentioned the answer, the New Haven Ravens, I would have eliminated New Britain, Connecticut probably right away because I feel like I have a pretty good handle on the teams that have played there. So it would have come down to New Haven versus Newport. If I didn't actually already know the answer to that question based on, just having done research about the team, I probably would have been a coin flip between New Haven and Newport. So I'll take the win. Listen, all you can do is beat the opponent they put in front of you. So I'll take the win and say New Haven. Final answer.
Quote Bill Murray from Caddyshack, "It's in the hole."
I thought you were going to quote the Raven.
Nevermore.
Nicely done.
So yes, you are correct, and as I said, you were going to be correct, and if you weren't, I would have been a monkey's uncle. So New Britain does have a team, or did have a team, I should say, that relocated. New Britain was home to the Rockcats until 2016, when they moved where and became what, Paul?
Well, so you say that they moved to a place in 2016, but they actually became the Hartford Yard Goats. But the award-winning now Duncan Stadium, whatever, where they play in Hartford, was not ready for them in 2016. So while they technically became the Hartford Yard Goats in 2016, they played an entire season on the road and then finally played their first home game in 2017 in Hartford. So yes, the New Britain Rockcats with their Guy Kilcrest logo moved to Hartford, Connecticut to become the Yard Goats.
Okay. So that was not the correct answer, as we've already established. Also, Newport was not the correct answer. Newport last had affiliated baseball in the mid-30s and early 40s, when there were Cardinals, Tigers, and Dodgers affiliates there. They have not had affiliated baseball since the early 40s. They do have a collegiate summer league team there, the Newport Gulls. Not a particularly interesting name, but they play in this wonderfully quirky ballpark that is on my bucket list of ballparks to visit.
The Newport Gulls have a really kitschy logo. It might not be the most exciting nickname, but I think their logo is kind of fun and kitschy.
And a childhood friend, a neighborhood friend of my younger son, Casey, played, I think, this past season with the Newport Gulls, and should have gone. I wanted to see a game at that stadium. I should have gone to see him pitch there. But anyway, so the correct answer is, of course, New Haven, and the team that moved to New Hampshire was the New Haven Ravens, as mentioned. And New Havenites apparently had a propensity for giving their ball clubs avian-themed monikers, as the Ravens were preceded by the New Haven Bluebirds in 1898. Later, there was the New Haven Black Crows in 1909, and the New Haven Prairie Hens, which was what the Black Crows were renamed the very next season in 1910. So you had those avian-themed names. Other notable New Haven professional baseball team names include the New Haven Nutmegs. Do you know why they would name themselves the Nutmegs?
No, I have no idea. I'm excited to hear.
Well, in addition to being nicknamed the Granite State, another nickname for New Hampshire is the Nutmeg State. And so there's the Nutmegs. They were also professional teams there. They're known as both the New Haven Profs, short for professors, and the New Haven Students. So something was going on there. I don't know if it was due to some university that was there, or just that they loved education, but those were a couple of names. There was also a team called the New Haven Merlins, but Merlins was spelled with a U, and I looked it up to determine was that some type of an animal? Is that a thing? And I couldn't find anything on it. So maybe it was somebody's name, because back then, sometimes teams were named after their manager or owner. Like, for instance, Cleveland Indians fans might know that the Indians were once known as the Cleveland Naps, and that was for Napoleon Lajoie. Is that how you pronounce his name?
I would have said either LaJoie or LaJoie.
Okay, well,
But I don't know. I'm just I've only ever read that name. I don't know if I don't recall ever seeing it pronounced.
Yeah, it's spelled Lajoie.
Right.
Pronounce it at your own risk. So, but they were known as it was mainly the media. They would just refer to the team as, basically Napoleon Lajoie's team, and refer to it as the Naps. And as a matter of fact, the Brooklyn Dodgers were at one time referred to as the Brooklyn Robins, and that was because of their manager, Wilbert Robinson. So there might have been some their manager, their owner might have been named Merlin, but that was the name of a New Haven team. And then lastly, there was a team called the New Haven Weissmen, and that was not wise men like from a biblical term, but rather like basically a Jewish last name.
Yeah.
Weissman. I have a client, Skip Weissman, and that was legitimately a name of a New Haven team. And who Weissman was, my research could not uncover. So I'm just putting that out there. We talk about minor league baseball team names all the time, talking today about Fisher Cats, Ravens, Primaries. We talk about the genesis of these names, the viability of these names. And I just love looking at some of these crazy names that teams were called back in the time, the Merlins with a U and the Weissmen.
I always have to point out when this conversation comes up of the media naming teams for individuals back in the late 1800s, my Richmond Spiders were named for a baseball player who had very long limbs and looked like a spider out on the pitcher's mound. He was a pitcher named Puss Ellison. And I've always said, if your sports team is going to be named for a person named Puss Ellison, that Spiders is kind of the best you can hope for.
Because the Richmond Pussies wouldn't have worked as well?
There goes our clean rating, Dan. Thanks for nothing.
Baby cats. What's your problem with house pets?
Dan, what a thrill to get to speak to you every single week, to get to speak to you twice this week. So much fun. Thank you, as I've said, for taking time out of your busy schedule. Thanks for hopping on and bringing me a softball of a Studio Simon Stumper this week. And I will see you next week when we're going to talk about apostrophes.
I'm looking forward to that one. I've already got my Studio Simon Stumper ready for that. And I'm really looking forward to that one. It might be my favorite topic for a Studio Simon Stumper ever. So I hope you have a great week until then, and looking forward to rejoining you and issuing that stumper. So see ya.
See you, Dan.